And as always the case, before working on any firearm, you want to do a safety check to make sure that the firearm is free and clear of any ammunition. This is the magazine release. It's a paddle style magazine release. You just push it forward, or in operation, you would grasp the magazine, pull it forward, and then you could slide the magazine out. As we can see, the magazine is free and clear. Open up the bolt, we can see down in the chamber, and it's free and clear as well. So the firearm is safe, so we can go ahead and start looking at some of the design features of the Tech 9. The Tech 9, it's a single action striker fired pistol. This is the trigger right here, obviously. It's a single action trigger, striker fired. As we already discussed, that's the magazine release. This is our charging handle that also operates as the safety. When you push in, that would put it on safe. When you pull out, that would be on fire. Those are the only actual controls of the firearm. There is no bolt hold open or lock device, either on the last round fired or even a manual one. So to hold the barrel open, you have to physically hold it open. It's a very stout spring. It's a blowback operated firearm. So aside from the weight of the rather large bolt, it's got a fairly hefty recoil spring to keep everything in operation. Some other features, and all these controls and features are pretty much synonymous with all of the various versions of the Tech 9. That would include the Tech 9, the DC9, and the AB10. The Tech 9 is what you'd call the original kind of version of it after they started making the closed bolt operation. The Tech 9 has sling mounts on the upper receiver right here. The DC9, those were eliminated, and it was replaced with a single sling mount that was right here. It was on basically a stamped metal piece that went in between the tubular upper and the polymer lower, and it was just a single piece that came out and had a slot in it for a sling. The AB10, the main difference is it does not have the barrel shroud. Basically on the DC9 and the Tech 9, the tubular receiver continues forward, has holes drilled in it, and that's the barrel shroud. They also frequently had threaded barrels, whereas the AB10, the barrel was shortened. So from the front end about here forward, totally different on the AB10. The sights on all of them are a stamped steel affair. They're fairly crude. They're not adjustable in any format. They would serve to get you pointed in the right direction. In all actuality, they operate a lot better than what you would think they would. However, they are what they are. They're just simple stamped metal parts that are spot welded on. The barrel is hooked to the front trunnion, which is inside the tubular steel receiver. It's spot welded in place right there and right there, and so none of that can come out. None of it's serviceable. So that's pretty much it. As far as disassembly, that's the disassembly pin right there. This area is also the most prone area for damage to these firearms. And these will frequently crack right in this area here for a variety of reasons. Usually it's because the firearm was dropped. It would cause it to crack. Also, these pins are very tight, so sometimes if people are a little bit overzealous in trying to put the pin in or out, they could cause some damage. Unfortunately, once this polymer receiver here cracks in this area, the receiver is pretty much done. People have tried all kinds of epoxies and solvents and plastic welding to try to repair those issues when it occurs. None of them are really successful. So once that's cracked, the receiver is pretty much unusable, and you have an assembly of parts. So one thing you want to keep an eye out for. Now, as far as disassembly, like I said, those pins are frequently very tight, so you'll need usually some persuasion. So a little punch and a small hammer. Like I said, you do want to be careful when you're doing this so that you don't inadvertently damage the receiver. So once the pin's out, you can pull the trigger to release any spring tension, and then the upper receiver comes off the lower receiver. So on the lower receiver, very simple in operation. They're all stamped metal components. There is our ejector right there. That's the sear, and that's the disconnector. Now, in operation, it's a very simple operation. When you pull the trigger, it pulls the disconnector down, and that pulls the sear down. See if you can see that. Now, when the sear goes down, that releases the striker, so the striker can go forward to fire the cartridge. Also, on its way forward, it pushes onto the back of that disconnector. And see if I can do this. That releases the sear so it can come up. So then when the cartridge fires and the bolt comes back along with the striker assembly, it comes back, and then when the bolt comes back forward, the striker would get caught again on the sear, and it's ready to fire. You could lift the trigger up. That disconnector grasps back a hold of the sear, and then you could pull it for the next shot. That's how that works. As far as these parts here, you would not want to disassemble this any further. There's really no need to. You can get access to everything to clean it out here. You just want to clean it all out. Light coating of oil for corrosion prevention and lubrication. You would not want to disassemble any of this because any changes or damage on any of these parts could make the firearm unsafe or just inoperable. Also, parts are hard to come by for these, so for the most part, you'll just want to leave all that alone as it is. The upper receiver, this section here is what the pin goes into. It has a detent ball, the little shiny silver ball there, and that would engage the pin in that central groove to hold it in place. The pin itself is usually so tight in the receiver itself, the lower receiver, in the hole there, that usually that's not needed. However, the more times the firearm's taken apart, the more that everything would get worn, and eventually that detent ball theoretically would be there to hold it in place. This right here, these two sections, that's the striker assembly itself, and that little rod right there is the firing pin. This is the guide rod for the striker. Of course, there's the spring for the striker, and you can see the main recoil spring farther down in there. So we'll go ahead and take a look at disassembling the rest of this. Has a metal screw-in rear cap. This was actually one of the improvements that was made on this firearm. The original version, back when it was an open bolt firearm, did not have that screw-in back plate. Instead, it used the actual back of the receiver itself to hold everything in place. As a result, this polymer here took all of the abuse of that bolt going back and forth, and so it's not unusual for those to start cracking in the back section here. And of course, once that occurs, there again, receiver is useless. So this screw-in back plate was a fairly big improvement on that. This pin in the back engages with a hole in the back of the receiver, and that's what locates it. And the slot there is what you use to disassemble it. So basically, it's a screwdriver, and you just turn it counterclockwise. Now it is under spring pressure, so you want to keep a hold of everything. So once you unscrew it, there's the back plate itself. This right there is a rubber type buffer. Then you can remove the guide rods and the springs. The bigger spring is the main recoil spring. The smaller one is the striker spring. Then the bolt itself, you would move the charging handle back to that large hole, because it can now go all the way back to that now that the back plate's off, and you can just pull the charging handle out, and then the bolt will just slide out the back. Now in the bolt, this is the striker assembly, and it comes apart. Actually, that part just comes out. There's the firing pin. So this together is the striker assembly. The bolt is just a big heavy machined piece of metal. There isn't really anything else on here to service, except you do have the extractor right there, which is it's a spring steel extractor. It goes down into that hole, comes down to about here. This Allen head set screw is what holds it in place, so you can replace the extractor if it gets damaged. That's assuming that you can still find one. Like I said, parts in these, they haven't been made for a long time, so finding parts is a little bit of a challenge. But really, as far as maintenance, you would just want to clean everything off, clean any grime or anything off. A nice coating of oil for lubrication and corrosion prevention. This slot right here is what the ejector travels down. So as the bolt comes back, the ejector would basically pop out, and then that's what would flip the cartridge out. The striker assembly, same thing. You'd want to clean it all off. A little light coating of oil. Reassembly is just the opposite. The firing pin goes into the hole right there, and then you just slide the striker assembly forward. You could then put it into the receiver, line up the hole there, put your charging handle back in. Oh, and that little narrow section right there is what travels through where it narrows down there. So then they can slide back and forth. As far as the springs, the main recoil spring goes in there and its guide rod. The striker spring goes into this hole there along with its guide rod. So you line those up. And then you can let it all come forward. Put your cap on. Then you just push it down and start the threads. And once they're started, just tighten it down. You just need to tighten it down snug. You don't need to torque it down or anything. Once you have that in, you want to make sure everything's nice and smooth here. So that all works good. Again, you'd put that pin into the hole there. This section would go into this channel right there, and then you would line up the hole there with the hole there. So put that in first. At this point, you'd want to pull the trigger to release the spring pressure from the sear. And at this point, when you line it up, you push back. And it takes a little bit of finagling, but the trigger needs to come forward so that basically the sear and everything clears. Make sure your hole's lined up there. You can put your pin in. And you'll probably need a little bit of gentle persuasion. And then do a function check. And we're good to go. And that's it.